Because you said polio. Once we've breached that, because that's the big one.
Yeah.
Right. This is the one that everybody points to. We don't have crippled kids.
Yeah.
When you look at the historical timeline of polio, what do you think caused it to go to essentially not be a problem anymore?
Okay.
You don't think vaccinations had anything to do with that?
Well, it's not what I think, because that's the thing. Like, look, when I got into this, I didn't say, I want to argue that vaccines are great. I said, look, I don't care. I didn't have skin in the game. I didn't have vaccine-injured kids. I couldn't have cared less about it, essentially, except that it was something in front of me and it didn't make sense. So I thought, wherever the truth falls, that's what I'm going to talk about. So what I say is that what the facts line up to show you is that polio is still here. Polio is still alive and well. Polio is called different things today, whereas back in the 1940s, 1950s, the criteria for diagnosing polio were completely different to the year that the vaccine was introduced. The playing field, the goalposts, everything was changed so that despite the fact that there was more paralytic polio in the years after that vaccine was introduced, they were able to show a complete cascading drop of paralytic polio simply because of the way they changed the definitions of what polio is and what could cause it. And they started testing for the virus, where before they would never test for the virus. And when they started testing for the virus later, what they would find that people had Guillain-Barré syndrome, they didn't have virus, or they had Coxsackie virus or echovirus, or they were lead poisoned or mercury poisoned, which was the mercury and lead were the leading treatments of the day, including bloodletting. They were telling people to take your cigarette and put a little bit of arsenic in there. It's good for your lungs. Yeah. They were literally blowing smoke up people's butts. Like that's where the term comes from, because if you want to Google that now, you'll see that there's an instrument that does it.
Yeah.
So, the polio story, where to even begin? And so there's about 70 pages. And so that became my obsession. So when people said, what about polio? And I started digging this up, I went deep into it.
Did you dive into pesticides?
Yes. You have to dive into pesticides. Yeah. Because the tonnage of production of DDT absolutely mirrored the diagnosis for polio in the days. And the countries that still make DDT today is where we're still seeing this paralytic polio situation happen. And
also, weren't the first cases, did they break out in a rural community?
The first cases of polio, yes.
In the United States, paralytic polio.
Yes, it was out in the countryside. Well, and that was probably more because of the sheep and cow dipping. So arsenic, you'd have to look at arsenic, you have to look at the mercurials, you have to look at the calcium arsenate, lead arsenate sprays that were put on trees. But what you're talking about in particular, they would call the cow disease. They would go out in the family, when you would go to the house, they'd say, all the kids have the cow disease, what the cows had before. Well, what were they doing? They would have these trenches. You talk to farmers, even today. Oh, yeah, we had trenches. We would just walk them straight through, and I'd be soaked with the stuff by the end of the day.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So they're basically soaking and bathing in arsenic, which is great for killing fleas and ticks. But it's not really great for keeping your nervous system happy, because the fact of the matter is, and this again, I've got medical references, everything. I can't get away with making stuff up, okay? I have to put a reference for everything. But arsenic causes the exact same spinal pathology that and fevers and everything. It literally mimics what they were calling polio and a polio virus back in the day.
I read this crazy statistic, and I still can't believe it's real, that 95 to 99% of all polio is asymptomatic.
That's exactly right. So polio virus is what we call a commensal, just like you have staph on your skin and strep on your skin, and it actually serves a purpose. It keeps other microbes in check as long as you don't get a cut and have not a good immune system to deal from the inside out. So polio, the reason I can say that polio is a commensal is because, again, there are medical studies that showed that people who dared to get on the edge of some of these wild native tribes down in South America or elsewhere, but in particular I'm talking about a South American tribe called the Javante Indians. So the Indian Health Service got to the edge of it and bargained that they would get some stool and some blood from the tribes so that they could test it for polio. And what they found was 98 to 99% of every person they tested, and it was hundreds of people, had evidence of immunity to all three strains of polio. And they said to them, well, where are all your crippled children? Where's your short legs? Where are the people that died of respiratory failure? And they were like, we don't have any of that problem. So it was well known.
Could it possibly be that whatever you're calling polio evolved and became less powerful over time and more contagious? That does happen with some viruses, right?
Most viruses in nature don't become more problematic as they go through the human system. They become less problematic. Remember
right.
the whole COVID thing. Like in the beginning, people were getting super sick. It wasn't as contagious, but it was more virulent. And as it attenuated into the human bodies, it sort of kind of fizzled out a bit. And then we got the Omicron, which was, less. It was more spreadable, but it was much less pathological. And that's the natural process that happens. So when you're going to have real problems with microbes, they're usually going to be reverse attenuated, meaning made more lethal in a lab, and then they're introduced into the population. And look, I'm not making this up either. 1916, Upper East Side, Manhattan, there was a Rockefeller lab that their specific stated goal was to try to create the most pathological, neuropathological strain of polio possible. And they did that by taking monkey brains and human spinal serum and injecting it into monkeys. And there was a big problem with that, which was released into the public by accident. And the world experienced the worst polio epidemic on record, 25% mortality. That's unheard of. Really freaked the public out. But you can see the epicenter as it fanned out, and as time went on, never heard of it again. It attenuates as it moves through the body because it's a normal human commensal that goes back to its normal state when it's in a human. And that's generally what happens. If you have a highly lethal virus and it kills a lot of people, those people are dead. They can't spread anything. So that's kind of a different story if you want to talk about hantavirus or something like that. But as far as polio goes, no, polio was only made more lethal by the stupid things that humans did around it. So make it more invasive into the body, just like you can go do stupid things and end up with herpes outbreaks and, staph outbreaks. Polio virus is a normal commensal. It used to be until we obliterated it with oral vaccines and replaced it with vaccine strain. But the wild strains are normal human commensals.
So there's vaccine strain polio that just comes from a vaccine and is transmissible?
Absolutely.